Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather. This sits back here on my all-time list. It's a lovely book that really looks at the life of clergy in the American Southwest in the middle of the 19th century. Is there really a plot? No. This mostly follows the life of the clergy, which at times can be eventful and other times it's just, you could say, ordinary. But Cather, despite not being a Catholic, really manages, I think, to capture what was going on in the interior lives of these priests through the various vignettes she tells. So I thought, in terms of review this time, I'm simply going to read a few excerpts from the book to give you a sense of what's being told and as well as a sense of Cather's writing. So let's start here. One afternoon in the summer of 1851, a solitary horseman, followed by a pack mule, was pushing through an arid stretch of country somewhere in central New Mexico. He had lost his way and was trying to get back to the trail, with only his compass and his sense of direction for guides. The difficulty was that the country in which he found himself was so featureless, or rather, that it was crowded with features, all exactly alike. As far as he could see, on every side, the landscape was heaped up into monotonous red sand hills, not much larger than haycocks, and very much the shape of haycocks. One could not have believed that in the number of square miles a man is able to sweep with the eye, there could be so many uniform red hills. He had been riding among them since early morning, and the look of the country had no more change than if he had stood still. He must have traveled through 30 miles of these conical red hills, winding his way in the narrow cracks between them, and he had begun to think that he would never see anything else. They were so exactly like one another that he seemed to be wandering in some geometric nightmare. Flattened cones, they were, more the shape of Mexican ovens than haycocks. Yes, exactly the shape of Mexican ovens, red as brick dust, and naked of vegetation except for small juniper trees. And the junipers, too, were the shape of Mexican ovens. Every conical hill was spotted with smaller cones of juniper, a uniform yellowish green, as the hills were uniform red. The hills thrust out of the ground so thickly that they seemed to be pushing each other, elbowing each other aside, tipping each other over. The blunted pyramid, repeated so many hundred times upon his retina and crowding down upon him in the heat, had confused the traveler, who was sensitive to the shape of things. Mais c'est fantastique, he muttered, closing his eyes to wrest them from the intrusive omnipresence of the triangle. When he opened his eyes again, his glance immediately fell upon one juniper which differed in shape from the others. It was not a thick-growing cone, but a naked, twisted trunk, perhaps 10 feet high, and at the top it parted into two lateral, flat-laid branches, with a little crest of green in the center, just above the cleavage. Living vegetation could not present more faithfully the form of the cross. The traveler dismounted, drew from his pocket a much-worn book, and baring his head, knelt at the foot of the cruciform tree. Under his buckskin riding coat he wore a black vest and the cravat and collar of a churchman. A young priest at his devotions, and a priest in 1,000, one knew at a glance. His bowed head was not that of an ordinary man. It was built for the seat of a fine intelligence. His brow was open, generous, reflective, his features handsome and somewhat severe. There was a singular elegance about the hands below the fringed cuffs of the buckskin jacket. Everything showed him to be a man of gentle birth, brave, sensitive, courteous. His manners, even when he was alone in the desert, were distinguished. He had a kind of courtesy toward himself, toward his beasts, toward the juniper tree before which he knelt, and the God whom he was addressing. His devotions lasted perhaps an hour, and when he rose he looked refreshed. He began talking to his mare in halting Spanish, asking whether she agreed with him that it would be better to push on, weary as she was, in hope of finding the trail. He had no water left in his canteen, and the horses had had none since yesterday morning. They had made a dry camp in these hills last night. The animals were almost at the end of their endurance, but they would not recuperate until they got water, and it seemed best to spend their last strength in searching for it. On a long caravan trip across Texas, this man had had some experience of thirst, as the party with which he traveled was several times put on a meager water ration for days together. But he had not suffered then as he did now. Since morning he had had a feeling of illness, the taste of fever in his mouth, and alarming seizures of vertigo. As these conical hills pressed closer and closer upon him, he began to wonder whether his long wayfaring from the mountains of Auvergne were possibly to end here. He reminded himself of that cry wrung from his Saviour on the cross, "J'ai soif." Of all our Lord's physical sufferings, only one, "I thirst," rose to his lips. Empowered by long training, the young priest blotted himself out of his own consciousness and meditated upon the anguish of his Lord. The passion of Jesus became for him the only reality. The need of his own body was but a part of that conception. His mare stumbled, breaking his mood of contemplation. He was sorrier for his beasts than for himself. He, supposed to be the intelligence of the party, had got the poor animals into this interminable desert of ovens. He was afraid he had been absent-minded, had been pondering his problem instead of heeding the way. His problem was how to recover a bishopric. He was a vicar apostolic, lacking a vicariate. He was thrust out. His flock would have none of him. The traveler was Jean-Marie Latour, consecrated vicar apostolic of New Mexico and bishop of Agathonica in Partibus, at Cincinnati a year ago. And ever since then he had been trying to reach his vicariate. No one in Cincinnati could tell him how to get to New Mexico. No one had ever been there. Since young Father Latour's arrival in America, a railroad had been built from New York to Cincinnati, but there it ended. New Mexico lay in the middle of a dark continent. The Ohio merchants knew of two routes only. One was the Santa Fe Trail from St. Louis, but at that time it was very dangerous because of Comanche Indian raids. His friends advised Father Latour to go down the river to New Orleans, thence by boat to Galveston, across Texas to San Antonio, and to wind up into New Mexico along the Rio Grande Valley. This he had done, but with what misadventures! His steamer was wrecked and sunk in the Galveston harbor, and he had lost all his worldly possessions except his books, which he saved at the risk of his life. He crossed Texas with a trader's caravan, and approaching San Antonio he was hurt in jumping from an overturned wagon, and had to lie for 3 months in the crowded house of a poor Irish family, waiting for his injured leg to get strong. It was nearly a year after he had embarked upon the Mississippi that the young bishop, at about the sunset hour of a summer afternoon, at last beheld the old settlement toward which he had been journeying so long. The wagon train had been going all day through a greasewood plain, when late in the afternoon the teamsters began shouting that over yonder was the villa. Across the level, Father Latour could distinguish low brown shapes like earthworks, lying at the base of wrinkled green mountains with bare tops, wave-like mountains, resembling billows beaten up from a flat sea by a heavy gale, and their green was of two colors, aspen and evergreen, not intermingled but lying in solid areas of light and dark. As the wagons went forward and the sun sank lower, a sweep of red carnelian-colored hills lying at the foot of the mountains came into view. They curved like two arms about a depression in the plain, and in that depression was Santa Fe at last, a thin, wavering adobe town, a green plaza, at one end a church with two earthen towers that rose high above the flatness. The long main street began at the church. The town seemed to flow from it like a stream from a spring. The church towers and all the low adobe houses were rose-color in that light, a little darker in tone than the amphitheater of red hills behind, and periodically the plumes of poplars flashed like gracious accent marks, inclining and recovering themselves in the wind. The young bishop was not alone in the exaltation of that hour. Beside him rode Father Joseph Vaillant, his boyhood friend, who had made this long pilgrimage with him and shared his dangers. The two rode into Santa Fe together, claiming it for the glory of God. So a very evocative scene there. And here, just a much smaller excerpt than the one I just read, to give you a sense of their life together. Father Joseph frowned intently at the earthen pot in the middle of the table. His pale, nearsighted eyes had always the look of peering into distance. "C'est ça, c'est vrai," he murmured. "But how," he exclaimed as he filled the bishop's plate again, "how can a man make a proper soup without leeks, that king of vegetables? We cannot go eating onions forever." After carrying away the soupière, he brought in the roast chicken and pomme sautée. And salad, Jean, he continued as he began to carve. Are we to eat dried beans and roots for the rest of our lives? Surely we must find time to make a garden. Ah, my garden at Sandusky. You could snatch me away from it. You'll admit that you never ate better lettuces in France. And my vineyard, a natural habitat for the vine, that. I tell you, the shores of Lake Erie will be covered with vineyards one day. I envy the man who is drinking my wine. Ah, well, that is a missionary's life, to plant where another shall reap. So here we just have a vignette at table. We get insight into life in France, and we get insight into the natural complements to the life of clergy. Yes, they are dedicated to God, but they also have to live life here on this earth, and they have their own loves and preoccupations as well. And, unsurprising that the French would be interested in food. Here, the bishop is out among the different parishes, and he's visiting people, and this is at the end of a meal with some of these people. They relapsed into the silence, which was their usual form of intercourse. The bishop sat drinking his coffee slowly out of the tin cup, keeping the pot near the embers. The sun had set now. The yellow rocks were turning gray. Down in the pueblo, the light of the cook fires made red patches of the glassless windows, and the smell of piñon smoke came softly through the still air. The whole western sky was the color of golden ashes, with here and there a flush of red on the lip of a little cloud. High above the horizon, the evening star flickered, like a lamp just lit, and close beside it was another star of constant light, much smaller. Another very brief excerpt here as a reminder to us as Catholics, as Christians, that prayer is something that is always important. You will certainly be tired many times when you want to pray, and that is simply a temptation to avoid prayer in a certain sense. But what this small story is offering is a reminder to think differently about it. It was not difficult for the bishop to waken early. After midnight, his body became more and more chilled and cramped. He said his prayers before he rolled out of his blankets, remembering Father Vaillant's maxim that if you said your prayers first, you would find plenty of time for other things afterward. When they left the rock or tree or sand dune that had sheltered them for the night, the Navajo was careful to obliterate every trace of their temporary occupation. He buried the embers of the fire and the remnants of food, unpiled any stones he had piled together, filled up the holes he had scooped in the sand. Since this was exactly Jacinto's procedure, Father Latour judged that, just as it was the white man's way to assert himself in any landscape, to change it, make it over a little, at least to leave some mark of memorial of his sojourn, it was the Indian's way to pass through a country without disturbing anything, to pass and leave no trace, like fish through the water or birds through the air. And I love the juxtaposition there, I think arguing that neither is correct. So there is this Navajo way of passing through nature, and there is a European way of passing through nature, and both have their own expressions, and both are coherent within those own cultural traditions. It's important to be aware of those differences and not insist on there being only one way to interact with nature. There is a way, not the way. So, Death Comes for the Archbishop, Willa Cather, a very fine, short, I think relatively short, under 300 pages, relatively short novel. I say relatively short. Maybe other people are saying, okay, come on, Stephen, 300 pages. But in any case, I think it's a relatively short novel, well worth your time. If you'd like to get a copy, it's a way that you can support this channel using the link in the description below. A free way you can support this channel, hit like, subscribe, share this with people who might be interested in books from American literature that they may not have heard before. Most American students are likely to have heard of Willa Cather through My Antonia, but this is a lesser known work which I think deserves to be better known. Probably better known than My Antonia. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, there's links to buy me a coffee and PayPal below. If you'd like to support me on an ongoing basis, there's Patreon and YouTube membership. You'll get early access to videos like this one, as well as a chance to have access to videos that I don't release to the public and chat with me behind the scenes about what I'm working on. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, my Amazon wish list is below. You can click through. You'll see different books on different issues. If you see books about Palestine, that's for Palestine Bookshelf. But otherwise, if it's not about Palestine, it's for this channel. So purchase a book, send it my way, and in that way you can nominate and sponsor a video, and I will try to get it in. I'll try to get to reviewing it in a timely manner. Until next time, enjoy your reading.